Hello and welcome to London. I'm Enda Brady. Now, for a year, people have been taking to the streets of this city and others all over the world calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. I want to hear how they're feeling on this rather grim anniversary, from the everyday marchers to the politicians, the celebrities, and even the Jewish Holocaust survivors who turn up at these protests.
Shut it down! Shut it down! Shut it down! We have to keep going. Nobody thought at the beginning that this would go on for a year and it would get to the point where Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen are all included in what's happening. We've got to the point where Israel is acting with no impunity, where America is backing them. There are no red lines. And people have started to wane from protests, thinking they're not making a difference, but they are. We know that lines have been crossed. Countries have the right to defend themselves, but Europe only believes that when it is European or Western countries involved. That does not work for us in the Middle East or brown and black people. We are clearly second-class citizens in Europe and the Western world.
365 days of tens of thousands of children being killed, and Israel, the government of Israel, getting away with war crimes with absolute impunity. So we have to, as people come on the streets and demand our government, particularly the UK government, takes action which has been so sorely missing over the last 365 days. Well, as you've had war crime after war crime committed, how on earth can you, Prime Minister, justify the selling of arms? 90% of arms export licenses to Israel are continuing to this day. So I would say stop selling the arms. Secondly, I would say demand a ceasefire. We know that Israel has been the block to a ceasefire. That's not my words, the words of hostage families in Israel itself. And the third thing I would say to Keir Starmer is don't wait. Immediately recognise the state of Palestine, as Ireland, as Norway, as Spain, and many other countries, in fact most other countries around the world have done.
Britain is still supplying weapons, indeed more so to Israel, and that the US has now poured vastly more firepower, including bigger bombs, to Israel. We've got now 1 million people displaced in Lebanon, on top of the 2 million in Gaza, and at least 42,000 dead in Gaza. I have no idea what the total number is dead in Lebanon. This is a carnage beyond belief. That the people of this country, of all denominations, all ethnic groups, and a wide range of political opinions, are disgusted by the behaviour of the British government, disgusted at the defiance of international law by Israel and Britain, and that we will be here in bigger and bigger numbers as long as it takes to bring about a ceasefire.
Well, I'm always feeling emotional when I come to a march. One of the reasons I come to a march is to be a voice for the oppressed. But also it's a very cathartic experience because you have to hold all your emotions in all week, every day for a year. You can't say anything to anybody. So it's a very vibrant atmosphere, but you can laugh, you can cry, you can sing, you can dance. But the most important thing is to be a voice for the oppressed because they feel abandoned. They do see us marching, and they need to see us marching, and we will not stop marching.
I found it very painful and shocking that this destruction and killings that we experienced during the Holocaust in World War II is revisited on the Palestinian people, and it is done by the same people who were the victims originally, and it is doubly shocking that first that they are capable of doing it, but also for it to be the people who suffered the same themselves. And I'm afraid it even goes for some of my family I visited in Israel, that I found Israel overwhelmingly racist in their attitude, and this infected even my own family who just survived the Holocaust. 15 members of my family died in the Holocaust. And one example is that a branch of the family who lived in Transylvania were told by the locals that they could be smuggled across the Romanian border, where they would have been in relatively greater safety. But one member of the family was disabled, and therefore they turned down the opportunity. And they all died as a result. And I think this kind of thing repeats in Gaza, where families are told to flee in a matter of 24 hours sometimes. And they have exactly the same problems. What to do with disabled members of a family? Do they leave them behind? Or all of them stay and be victims of bombing?
1 year into this, we can't believe where we are now. We thought that there would be a ceasefire way back. And now we're at a stage where we're not only seeing Israel continue its genocidal assault on Gaza, we're seeing the expansion of it in Lebanon. And it's particularly a sad time for me because my family, who were originally expelled in 1948 into Lebanon as refugees, they are now having to be displaced once again in Lebanon after thinking that was the country of safety. So we're now at a stage where we have no choice but to continue marching, to continue protesting and sending a message to this government. The main message is that the people are disconnected from what the government are saying. What Keir Starmer came out to say when he came out to condemn Iran after failing to condemn Israel's genocide on Gaza and its bombing of Lebanon, when he said that we stand with Israel and that we support her right to self-defense, well, clearly the British public are here on the street to say, no, we do not stand with Israel. We stand with humanity, with human rights, with justice for all. And that's why we're here calling for a ceasefire, an end to the occupation, an end to the genocide, and to stop all arms sales to Israel immediately.
We have the power of the people, we have the outpouring support and solidarity, and we have these hundreds of thousands of voices saying enough, stop the massacres, stop the genocide, apply international law equally, and hold all those war criminals accountable. We have these millions who want to see a different path to a different future, who want to see peace and justice, who wants to see a free Palestine. If you asked me at the beginning, I wouldn't have thought that the genocide will last for a year. I wouldn't have thought that the world will allow this to happen for a whole year. It's really heartbreaking, heart-wrenching to see that the world has failed, has watched this with silence, when this is the first genocide in the history, that it is recorded in real time, that the very people that are being executed are documenting their own execution, that the millions of the people worldwide have received and seen these unbelievable images of human evil inflicted, yet the world did nothing to stop it. So at least the people of the world are doing all what they can, and I believe their power matters, their voices matters. And London has become the epicenter of international solidarity. So this is a moment when we extend our gratitude and our deep appreciation for the depth of feeling in the British public, among the British public. The cross community, the unity of the communities is commendable. You see all backgrounds, all colors. It's almost a festive feel of families and children on strollers, sending a message that they celebrate their humanity and they celebrate their principled position. So yes, indeed, this is the most inspiring scene, and we can rely on the people and we can build a movement, and a movement is being built towards the finish line, and the finish line is the liberation of Palestine. The finish line is the enforcement of law and order all over the world, and the finish line is justice for everyone and the end to the discrimination and racism and the application of law equally.
Well, let's bring in our guests. Ben Jamal is director of the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and Chris Nynam is vice chair of the Stop the War Coalition. Gentlemen, you're both very welcome to TRT World. Ben, how are you feeling 1 year into these demonstrations now?
Well, look, and I was speaking to someone about this a couple of days ago, that none of us last October anticipated that we would still be marching 1 year on. This is the most sustained mobilisation probably in British political history since the suffragette movement. But in October last year, despite everything that we knew, that I knew about Western complicity with Israel's oppression of the Palestinian people, if you'd said to me that Israel will be green-lighted to commit a genocide that will still be continuing a year on, that will have killed at least 42,000 Palestinians. There's a report this week suggesting the fatality total might be closer to 120,000. Even I wouldn't have believed that, but here we are, and this is why people are still marching, because the genocide continues, but they are also marching because our complicity, the complicity of our government with that genocide, continues.
Chris, just come in on that. The UK government has changed in the last few months, but in reality, has anything changed? It still supports Israel?
No, there hasn't been any change at all, which is absolutely shocking. As Ben says, this is one of the biggest movements in British history. There's been repeated mobilisations on a massive scale, but also, importantly, this movement isn't just huge and dynamic and very, very sustained. It represents and expresses the opinion of the overwhelming majority of people in this country. 60% of people think there should be a ceasefire, 8% don't. 71% of the population don't trust Israel, think Israel is creating the problem in the first place. And one very interesting poll shows that only 12% of people in this country believe that the government is handling this situation well. So those in power, those in the establishment, there is a consensus across most of the media in the establishment, they are isolated, they are a tiny minority, and we represent the overwhelming majority, and that's very, very important in assessing the situation.
Ben, talk to us about the numbers you've seen over the past year. This is the 20th march in support of the Palestinian people. You've had millions of people on the streets over the past 12 months.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, this is the 20th march we've organised. In addition to that, though, when we're not holding national marches in London, there have been other demonstrations taking place, people protesting, marching, undertaking boycott actions in towns and cities across the UK. But in terms of these marches, we've had millions. The largest march, which took place in November, had somewhere between 800,000 and 1 million people. But even after a year, in the past 2 or 3 marches we've held in London, we've still had up to 80 to 100,000 people marching. People still march is because the reasons for them marching in the first place, the genocide, and their recognition that this genocide is built on the foundation of decades of oppression, continue. But additionally today, people are here marching because what we have warned about for months, that if Israel is continually granted impunity, then it will provoke a wider conflagration, is now unfolding with the attacks on Lebanon, that's killed at least 1,000 people, most of them civilians, in the past week. And now we're having open discussion across the political establishment. Should Israel bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, its oil refineries? Which part of Iran's civilian infrastructure should be attacked? So people are marching today because they want the violence to end. They're concerned about the risk to world peace, but they recognise that it's not going to end. The violence is not going to end until we deal with the root causes of the violence.
Chris, the previous government here, it was quite clear, did not like these marches. We had some Conservative ministers coming out describing them as hate marches. When what you see on the streets of London, the reality is you have people of all religions coming together. You have families, you have young children, parents, all communities coming together in support of the Palestinian people. How did you feel hearing that phrase, hate marches?
Well, such an incredible contrast between what the way that we're being portrayed in the mainstream and the reality on the ground. I mean, it's absolutely incredible. There are less arrests on our demonstrations on average than there are at a football match, the Glastonbury Festival, and the arrests are mainly because someone's wearing a t-shirt that the police don't like or that maybe is illegal. They're not for disorder of any kind. So they did try and portray this movement as violent, as potentially disruptive and causing disorder. And obviously we were shocked by that. The important thing is that in the face of what was a coordinated campaign against the movement back in November, we stood our ground and we said, I'm sorry, we believe that actually marching on Armistice Day is very appropriate because Armistice was about the end of a war and that's what we want. And because we held our ground there, and we've held our ground since whenever they've attacked us, actually their campaign against us, while it still continues, looks more and more frenzied and more crazy, in my opinion. So, you know, I think that's been a very important part of this. I mean, they are still trying to demonise us, that's the truth, but I think their job is becoming is becoming harder and harder. And just to also say, if you remember, the last government wanted to basically outlaw disinvestment campaigns. They wanted to say that we couldn't say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. There was a whole number of different attacks on us. Actually, we've pushed them back now. And the marches still continue to be entirely peaceful. And really, I don't think this stuff is sticking anymore, partly because we do represent the broad range of public opinion.
Ben, how did you feel hearing that phrase, hate marches?
Well, as Chris says, it's wrong. It's part of a wider attempt to demonise the movement. It's a long-standing process. This is a tactic employed by Israel and its allies for many, many years to try to, in the first place, silence Palestinian voices, but then silence those who are standing up for Palestinian rights by demonising them, by smearing them as either Islamist thugs, as supportive of terrorism, or anti-Semitic. And it ignores the reality that Chris has just articulated, that we're bringing people to these marches from all walks of life. They are here because actually they're committed anti-racist, and they recognise that coherent anti-racism means you stand up against the system of apartheid. And Israel is practicing the crime of apartheid, but they're coming here from all corners of society, and as we've said at every single march, we have thousands of Jewish people, many of them in an organised Jewish bloc. So it was an attempt to demonise, it was an attempt to create the grounds, create a body of public support for these marches to be banned. It didn't work. What we saw, one of the reasons why we had so many people marching on November the 11th was because there were a body of people who not only supported the cause but thought, this is one I need to attend because there's a serious threat on the right to protest here, and I'm not going to stand for that. And the end result, of course, was the Home Secretary was forced to resign. So they haven't stopped these attempts to demonise us. We saw it again utilised during the general election, when Labour lost seats it should have won to independent candidates who were standing on the issue of justice for the Palestinian people, and won extraordinary results. And then we saw an attempt to say, well, this is just because of intimidation, because of thuggery, where the reality was it was people saying, we do not support the Labour Party's position on these issues, we're going to vote for other people. So the attempts to smear us have not worked. They won't end, but we will continue to resist them because we know the principles on which we're gathering and the foundations of this movement.
Chris, what would you say to Keir Starmer as we now have one full year of war in Gaza?
Well, I would say we need a 180-degree turn in our foreign policy. It's an absolute disgrace. It's almost incomprehensible. It's unconscionable that a Labour government, of all things, should be involved in supporting Israel diplomatically, supporting it politically, and actually supporting it militarily as well. The British government arms Israel, but in a way, more importantly, plays a crucial kind of ideological role as the US's main supporter, as the US's main booster on the world stage. Some people say to us, actually, oh, it doesn't make any difference about British foreign policy. What difference do we make? It's absolutely not true. If the British government could be forced to break its support for Israel, to stop supporting this genocide, to stop arming it, if that could happen, if that happened, it would be a huge earthquake in geopolitics, because it would mean that the US would stand almost completely isolated on the world stage. And so Britain's role is very important. I think that's part of the reason why the movement here is so big, because people sense the heart of colonialism, the heart historically of imperialism in Britain. People sense that actually what happens here really does matter. I would say we have to have a change in foreign policy, and I would also, in a way more realistically perhaps, send him a message that this movement is going to continue, it's going to grow until we force through that change.
Ben, what would you like to hear from the British Prime Minister?
Well, look, there's a number of things that have been laid bare in the past 12 months, and one of those is the hypocrisy of the so-called commitment by Western leaders to a rules-based order to respect for international law and human rights. The stench of that hypocrisy was particularly heavy this week, when, having failed to find any words of condemnation for a single one of Israel's massacres, over the past 12 months, for its ongoing genocide and for its assault upon the people of Lebanon, within hours of Israel's attack of Iran's missile strike on Israel, we saw Keir Starmer rushing to the podium at Downing Street to condemn it and talking about Israel's right to defend itself. And the reality that we know is no state that's practicing the crimes of genocide and apartheid has the right to defend itself. It's those who are oppressed by those crimes who have a right to defend themselves and to be defended. So my message to Keir Starmer is what you are doing is morally wrong, it's illegal. There's a ruling from the ICJ that calls on all governments not to take any steps that might aid and abet a genocide. Well, how can a British government say continuing to sell weapons to a state that's on trial at the world's highest court for the crime of genocide might not be, let's say, aiding and abetting a genocide? So it's legally wrong, it's morally wrong. I would say it's also a serious political miscalculation. Chris has talked about the body of public opinion with which Keir Starmer and his government are out of sync. But if you look on the global stage, Israel is becoming increasingly isolated. As I say, it's on trial in the world's highest court. Its leaders are facing prosecution in the ICC. 2 weeks ago, we had a UN resolution condemning Israel's illegal occupation, calling for it to end, calling for all states to stop arming Israel, supported by 70% of the member states of the UN. So those that continue to support Israel, the United States principally, the UK, are becoming increasingly isolated. So actually, even on the basis of politics, how do you want to present yourself to the world as a state that supports rights and international law? Continuing to support this illegality is doing great damage to the reputation of the UK on the world stage.
Chris, the word genocide, this was a debate a year ago when everything unfolded and began to unfold in Gaza. Is it even a discussion anymore as to whether or not what we've seen is a genocide?
I don't think it is, except on the margins. In fact, the only people really promoting the argument that it's not are those that are conducting it or those that are supporting it. You look at the level of destruction. They talk about a war against Hamas in Gaza. 1 million people, half the population, have had to flee their homes. The education system is collapsed. The hospital, the health system has collapsed. This is a war of punishment against a whole people. And that really is what genocide means. And so I think it's absolutely impossible to argue against that now. And I think one of the things that's happened in the last week, which has been extremely grim and extremely depressing and extremely angering, where we have a situation where Israel is now attacking Lebanon, there's the danger of war with Iran, they've been attacking Syria. One of the things that I think has happened is that even more people now are aware of the source of the problem and aware of the fact that Israeli aggression is not just causing absolute mayhem, carnage and misery for the Palestinian people, but it is now taking us to the brink of regional war and possibly even, and it sounds melodramatic, but I think we have to assess the situation very, very seriously, to the brink of a world war.
Ben, can I just ask, what do you think Netanyahu's game plan is? Because as soon as any conflict ends, surely he's out of office, given the intelligence failures by the Israeli intelligence community 12 months ago.
So I think that's a narrow issue, which is about Netanyahu. We know who he is. We've seen how he's operated over many years. So there's always a motivation for him of his own political survival. If you're looking at what's the long-term strategy, across the Israeli political establishment, successive governments, it's very clear what Israel's long-term aim is. It is to continue its oppression of the Palestinian people, to force the Palestinians. One of Israel's ministers said this very, very overtly, Bezalel Smotrich. He said it very clearly within the last year. What we are going to do is establish a single rule. We're going to annex the West Bank. So across all of historic Palestine, there will be a single rule that privileges the rights of Jewish people, and the Palestinians can accept their status or they can leave. So the long-term aim has been to avoid any possibility of Palestinian self-determination, to eternally deny the right to the Palestinian people forced into exile to return, to expand Israel. You know, those in the government at the moment say the boundaries of Greater Israel incorporate parts of Lebanon. Of course, Israel continues to occupy parts of Syria, has no intention. There are even those who say actually it extends into Iraq, to establish regional dominance, and as part of doing that, to drag wider powers into a war, in particular drag the US into a war with Iran. And I think at the moment, Chris has just talked about the danger of world war. I don't think that's melodramatic. What we're hearing is openly discussed across Israeli media, in the Israeli political establishment. Is this the moment to put this plan into operation? Is this the moment where we have the cover to continue the genocide in Gaza and we can now attack Iran's nuclear facilities? And we're going to be allowed to do that. So we're in an extremely dangerous moment, but the message is very, very clear. Israel doesn't hide what it wants to do. For decades, Israeli prime ministers have been saying, we will not grant the Palestinians the right to self-determination. Even Yitzhak Rabin, so-called the peace leader, he said the Palestinians will never have anything than an entity less than a state.
Chris Nynam, Ben Jamal, thank you both so much for taking time out of your day to speak to me here. We'll let you get back to the march right now. From me, Enda Brady, here in London, that's it for now. The news continues right here on TRT World.